From May 1846 until February 1848, the United States of America and the Mexican Republic were at war because the U.S. believed in Western expansion. After the annexation of Texas in June 1845, U.S. President James K. Polk set his eyes on the territory to the west of Texas that at the time belonged to the Mexican government. Mexico had threatened to declare war on the U.S. if they annexed Texas, but failed to follow through with that threat. President Polk then decided to instruct U.S. General Zachary Taylor to lead troops past Texas' southern border and reside in Mexican territory. Both Texas and Americans believed that the southern border was supposed to be further south, while Mexicans believed it to be more north. Polk then attempted to purchase the territory he desired, but when Mexico refused, he instructed Zachary Taylor to instigate a scuffle between the Mexican and U.S. armies in order to convince Congress to declare war against Mexico. After almost 2 years of battles, the war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed February 2, 1848, ratified by U.S. Congress March 10th, and by Mexican officials on May 25th of the same year. It ensured that there would be peace between both countries and its people, and also compensated Mexico $15 million for the territory it lost. Included in the treaty was that the Mexicans that wished to continue residing in California would be granted U.S. citizenship, and that their lands would not be taken from them so long as they had proof of ownership. Some of the terms that the treaty also incorporated in Article 10 when signed by Mexico was that the U.S. government must recognize and respect the Spanish or Mexican land grants that landowners held, as long as those grants were also valid to the Mexican government. However, in the ratification of the treaty, Article 10 was revoked because it would essentially void out that the U.S. had acquired any territory. Before the war and the transition from Mexican to American governments, California's residents consisted of both affluential Mexican families that owned ranchos and haciendas and working-class families that lived in poverty.
Rancheros were the elite of Mexican California. They would control the way of life for their employees. They would feed, shelter, and keep their employees in debt with medical benefits and loans. The years following the treaty, Americans took advantage of the abundance of natural resources the great state of California had to offer in its northern region. That included, but were not limited to, mining, logging, and agriculture. In 1839, John Augustus Sutter left Europe and came to California to create a fort and trading post at the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. He had to put forward his idea to the Mexican governor Juan Bautista de Alvarado. The governor was willing and even proposed Sutter to become a Mexican citizen if he can develop the land within the year, permitting him 50,000 acres of the Sacramento River. Because of the overflow of settlers from all over the land and across the ocean, the West grew at a faster rate than any other area of the United States. San Francisco quickly transformed from an emerging village into a metropolis with a steady demand for supplies to keep growing and became known as the Instant City. Mexicans were some of the first people to start mining for gold. Many men from Sonora, Mexico were experienced miners who quickly became victims to bands of jealous Anglos who would rampage through the cities and terrorize the communities. In 1850, California started taxation against foreign miners to discourage longtime inhabitants of California from mining for gold. To eliminate competitions for the Anglo-American, foreigners were forced to pay $16 to $20 a month if they wished to mine for gold. For 8 years, the tax was 25% of the state's revenue. Soon after, many of the laws found homes in other states, such as Idaho, where they discouraged Chinese from mining. California's new diversity made interracial tensions easier because relationships between Anglos and Mexican Americans were looked down upon.
Manifest Destiny, the belief that Americans are meant to expand westward, was accomplished after U.S. victory in the Mexican-American War. Days after Mexico seceded the Northern Territory, gold was discovered in Sutter's Mill, but word didn't get out until a few years later. In the meantime, Anglo-Americans were migrating westward, trying to claim land. However, most of the land was already taken, and the incoming population would settle on lands without the owner's consent. These settlers were known as squatters. Californianos were hopeless in removing squatters because the U.S. government refused to recognize Californianos' land titles as valid documents. When word finally spread out that gold was discovered in California, the numbers of Anglos increased and the demand for land escalated. Eventually, Californianos received their documents of ownership, but with the discovery of gold, the most desirable lands belonging to Californianos were challenged by Anglos in a court of law. To please the newcomers of the East, the Land Act of 1851 made matters be held accountable by a commission of 3 members, chosen by the Commander-in-Chief, that is, the President. It was meant to mark the final decision in court. The process took longer than expected. The 3 members of the commission were to read a formal written statement or hear a spoken account from the landowners. Thereafter, they had to scrutinize the documents presented. The documents had to be studied by determining whether they coexist with or quarrel with the records the government had in registration. Also, there had to be a testimony of witnesses when the documents of ownership were signed present at court. Finally, the lands had to be kept in good shape in order to keep the land. Claimants had lawyers representing them that were knowledgeable in English and Spanish, with a degree in law which cost money. The claimants could appeal the final decision of the commission if not satisfied, and the process would take about 5 years or more. The process was not cheap, and eventually landowners who managed to win in court had to sell their land in order to stay off debt.